Welcome from that cuckold in the Northeast, the land of colonialism and historical reverence, delving into free and intrepid esoteric exploration of everything under the aforementioned umbrella. I welcome you on a journey into the most detailed accounts of experience, evidence, and anecdote. Folks, I am your host, Michael Roser, and this evening, we are once again going back into the underground in way of this field, and we are going to revisit the appropriate moniker, Dark Hour Paranormal, with a jaunt back into the paranormal. Now, to be quite honest with you, as we have spoken to many different crews throughout our tenure here, everybody has a different thought, a different view, a different vantage point when it comes to this type of research. Now, why might this be? Could it be that the angles they approach are just vastly different, or could there be something a little bit closer underneath that umbrella wherein results yield a different conclusion because of the process that's undertaken, filters that are brought in from the people that are involved, perhaps even the personalities dictate how things go? Well, tonight, folks, I'd like to, once again, as I mentioned, jump right back into the paranormal, and I have a fantastic guest tonight. We have Jonathan from the West Virginia Paranormal Investigators. Now, again, we know that these groups, at least within the last, I'd say about 18, 20 years, they're a dime a dozen. Okay. And of course, when you talk to some of these folks, you can see where the interest really lies in way of that conviction of the work that they're doing. There are many groups that hold a certain integrity and an esteem that I have been watching and observing for some time. And you know what? West Virginia Paranormal Investigators has come up, and I am very honored to have Jonathan with us here tonight. Unfortunately, I believe it was Scott. He could not make it this evening, but perhaps for the next show, he will join us. With that being said, folks, I just want to remind you very quickly, okay, that if you'd like to ask a question, we are going to visit this towards the end of the show. I'll leave 15 minutes open towards the end to bring in some of your questions there. So hold those for the moment. If you'd like to donate to the channel, you know the super chat there is on the bottom in the chat. We also have the PayPal in the link. But more importantly, you can find the West Virginia Paranormal Investigators work and website down in the description below. I certainly encourage you to go and check them out and see what they've been up to. Because once again, all of these angles and approaches are a bit different from each other. And therefore, when we get back into this whole conglomeration of evidence, we're looking at it not from one source, but many sources. Long Island Bigfoot, I'm sorry, I meant to mention this. We're going to be acknowledging the super chats at the end of the show so that we don't disrupt the flow of the interview. But of course, I thank you from the bottom of my heart. First, just to start it off, Long Island Bigfoot with a $5 super chat saying, hey, great to see you, DHP. No. It's great to see you, Long Island Bigfoot, Mike Colantino. Thanks for being here with us. And guess what, folks? He'll be with us again this summer in Montauk as we're shooting the documentary that has been mentioned before. And of course, I'll let you know more as time goes on. All right. Guess what? We're going to get right into this tonight. I'm very excited to speak to Jonathan and pick his brain a little bit, if you will. Okay. Without further ado, I introduce to you Jonathan Johnson of the West Virginia Paranormal Investigators. Jonathan, how you doing tonight? Thanks for being on the show with us.
I'm doing great. I really appreciate you having me on. I've been looking forward to it, and I'm really excited to be here.
I really appreciate your presence, and I have to say right off the bat, because, you know, we do have the visceral component. This isn't just radio. You have a fantastic background there for Forgotten Relics. Tell me a little bit about how you came up with this name and why it's associated with your group.
Yeah, we're really proud of Forgotten Relics. It's something that I've wanted to get off the ground. I've been doing this, the paranormal, since 2007, and it's something I've wanted to do for a long time, and just for whatever reason, time, just the people around me, whatever it was, I just never had the right way to get it started. And then about 2 years ago, we finally got it off the ground. The one thing that we really wanted to do is kind of shed a different light on some places that either haven't really been investigated or places that maybe have been investigated, we want to bring a different style to it.
Hmm.
Forgotten Relics, not only the locations, but we also try to incorporate a lot of trigger objects or things that are associated with the locations to try to get some different activity. So that's kind of where the relics come in there. So we wanted to do something other than a lot of the other cookie cutter stuff that you see out there. And I think we've done a really good job at it.
Now, you're mentioning while you're speaking to me here about a certain originality that you and your group has taken. We've seen many different approaches to this field, especially when it comes to the electronic equipment. You have clairvoyants that come in and everything in between this left and right brain approach. What does your team do that's different, whether it's one thing or two things or a group of things? What do you guys do in an original way that it's different from some of the other paranormal groups out there? And how has this influenced your investigations?
I'd like to think we do a lot of different things than most people, and it's hard to pinpoint just one or two, but we're definitely not afraid to go outside of our comfort zone and push ourselves and try different techniques and do different experiments. And
Hmm.
a lot of times we'll go into a place and we'll just go in completely blind and not know anything. That way we don't have some of those preconceived notions that come along with getting the history of a place. Or we'll have three-quarters of the people there know the history and one person not know the history, and then see if we can kind of use that and kind of add a little bit of credibility to anything we are able to capture. And then, like I said, just the different techniques we use, not being afraid to isolate ourselves and do some stuff on our own, kind of push our boundaries. I think it gives us just something a little bit different than a lot of the other teams out there.
When you talk about the history of a location, and I understand very readily why you bring this up, you want to sort of go into some of these places, these locations, without any prior knowledge so that you have a clean slate. There's nothing to influence, what you may find there, or perhaps what we may be engaged in way of that energy. But have you noticed any sort of observable difference in respect to someone who knows the history about a particular location versus somebody who doesn't, other than the person who doesn't might come up with something that corroborates the actual history? In other words, do you find that the person who knows about the history has some sort of affect that the person who doesn't know about it does not?
I definitely think that that can be the case. I think sometimes we as investigators get kind of tunnel vision for
Hmm.
certain things. Like you go into a place and you obviously hear the story about this room and this person. You kind of get locked in on that one thing, and you're trying to do everything you can to interact with that person or that spirit and try to get the evidence that's going to show people that they're there. But if you go in with just like a clean slate, like you said, who knows if you're going to go to that room or you're going to go to the room two doors down where you're going to have a lot more activity. It just kind of opens you up and gives you more freedom during the investigation versus being so narrow-minded.
I think that's important to come in with that sort of direction. And of course, there's once again everything in between and weigh those experiences. But again, it's the collection of evidence that sort of is looked at in a totality, right? And this is sort of the conclusions that we loosely come to. Now, let me bring this up to you in a broad sense. You or your group can go into any location, myself included. We can go into a certain location, and because of the work that we do that compounds, we have a certain conviction about what might actually be there. Okay, and this goes, of course, well beyond perhaps the layperson coming in and saying, well, yeah, I just don't know if there are ghosts. I don't necessarily believe in this stuff, but I'm willing to just walk into the space and feel it. uh, for what you have found in way of your experiences, do you see that there is an acceptance from yourself to believe in this type of anomalous activity because you are ensconced within the field and have had these experiences? Or do you find your intrigue and possible belief to come more from a research or academic end?
I think it's easy once you've been doing it for so long and you've had a lot of experiences to kind of just take things at face value. But I think that's one of the things that you have to fight as an investigator is to just take things as they are. We don't show a lot during our episodes that we film just because it's kind of boring, but we try to
Hmm.
debunk everything that we catch. I mean, if we hear a voice, we're going sending people on different floors and talking, and we're sending people outside and talking. I mean, we're doing everything that we can to try to debunk what we experienced. So, I mean, if you go in and you just accept everything at face value, a lot of the stuff that we do experience and are able to capture can be pretty readily explainable. So you have to keep on your toes even after all these years. And I've had so many experiences that I feel pretty confident in my beliefs, but I also believe that 90+% of experiences can be pretty debunkable for most things.
You bring up some good points, which I will certainly touch upon in a moment. But before I do that, is belief a precursor to having these experiences or going into a place and, coming out with something in the way of anecdotal evidence?
I think it definitely can play a part. We've had people in our group over the past 15 years, like I said, that go in and they are just strict non-believers, and they put out that energy and they put out that vibe. And for whatever reason, not only for them, but for the people around them, it can kind of just, for whatever reason, kill the activity. So I don't know why that is. And it very well could be something to where, it's just the energy in the room. The energy plays a part in everything that we do with the paranormal. It's all about energy. Or it could be the fact that that person is just so against it that everybody else just kind of like turns off their belief for that little bit. So it's hard to say, but I definitely think it can make a difference on the type of things you experience out in the field.
Just speaking of belief, there are many who hold the idea that religion, regardless of what it is, although there seems to be some sort of focus on Christianity and Catholicism, I find when it comes to dealing with perhaps troublesome spirits. Again, I go back to this whole idea that, people are bringing religious filters into this. How important to you personally and your team is the religious belief when it comes to exploring the world of paranormal, and is it necessary?
I don't think it's necessary. I'm a religious person. I grew up in a very religious family. I had two uncles who were pastors. My mom has gone to church her entire life, and I
Mhm.
grew up that way. So I do have my beliefs, but I don't think that that's something that really needs to blend over into the paranormal. What I believe more is that you kind of just, again, when you're talking about that energy, you have whatever it is you believe in, whether it's God, whether it's another deity, whether it's Mother Earth, whatever it is that you can use to ground yourself in that moment when you're experiencing things. That's what I think it really comes down to, is being able to center yourself, balance yourself, connect with what's going on around you, and not let whatever is trying to influence you come through into your personal space. Or, I mean, that's how I feel, at least. So I think that Christianity or religion can definitely play a part in it. And I think it does get roped in a lot, like you said, with Catholicism and demons, because everybody thinks that everything is a demon now. So that gets brought into it quite a bit. But I don't think that that's a precursor to being out in the field, no.
Of course, when we deal with some of these troublesome spirits, I'll put it that way, whether it's demonic poltergeist activity, we sort of fall back on our strongest core belief. And for most people, that is the religion that they were raised with, even if they've strayed away from this or abandoned it in certain senses. When you're in that state of peril, it seems that people sort of weaken at the knees and fall back once again on something that they're familiar with. Could this really just be intention, instead of the dogma and what is perhaps expressed behind? But this is just intention. So if I walk in there as a Buddhist and, have certain protection measures, or Christian or Jew or whatever religion, it doesn't seem to matter, I think, in certain respects, as long as you have something, right? What would it be like if you had an atheist or some sort of agnostic that came in here? And of course, we're still kind of straddling that idea of belief, but at the same time, I'm wondering how much we're actually bringing into these spaces within our energy that certain things may act upon, use in a synergistic fashion, or reject altogether.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great point. I definitely think that what you're bringing into the situation can make a big difference. Excuse me. If you're walking in into any room, you change the energy in that room for better or for worse. And that's just
That's
science.
right.
Your temperature changes, everything changes when you come into a room, whether you believe in the paranormal or not. That's a thing. Like when you walk into the room, things change. And that's just how it is. So when you bring something into the room, whether that be what you're talking about with your beliefs or whatever the case is, something's going to happen. So when you bring in whatever it is, that could, I feel like if you're putting that out into the situation, then that does allow for whoever may be there to kind of either play off of that or use that against you or use that as a way to interact with you or connect with you. Who knows? I mean, we're all trying to figure this out as we go, but I definitely feel like that it can definitely play a big part in what happens.
Now, for you personally, I mean, you mentioned that you started this outfit in 2007, which is actually kind of interesting because that is when I started Dark Hour Paranormal as an investigational team. We only lasted for about 3 or 4 years for the reasons of attachment coming home with me. But that being said, we've talked about it, but we can certainly go into some of those peripheral ideas of attachments because I'd like to get your take on that. But before we do that, where did this start for you? Where did your interest in the paranormal or the world of esoteric sort of blossom? Was it with a specific experience that happened at some point in life, something pointed off, a one-off, if you will, or did you sort of grow up with a curiosity or experience as a child, and this sort of filtered in and flooded over into your adult life with either continuance of that experience and connection or just a general interest?
Yeah, I wish I had a big crazy experience like a lot of people do that got them involved. That would make the storytelling a lot easier, but unfortunately, I don't. I did exactly what you're talking about. I grew up hearing stories. My mom grew up in a house that she swears was haunted. She said that she would be upstairs in bed, and her mom would be downstairs screaming at her to get in bed because they'd both be hearing footsteps walking around, and she'd be under the covers terrified. So
Hmm.
hearing stories like that growing up always kind of piqued that interest in the back of my mind. And then 2007 was about the time when I went to college. And that was about the time when Ghost Hunters and some of the other shows kind of hit the mainstream. And
Mm-hmm.
I honestly didn't even realize that people went out and investigated before then. That was kind of a new thing for me. And I was like, oh, wow, people really do this. And I was like, man, I got to see what's out there. So I reached out to friends and family. My cousin Rich, who co-founded the group with me back in 2007, he actually
Mm-hmm.
had a near-death experience, so his story is pretty crazy. So he always had an interest in it after that, and since or after I reached out to him, he's like, "Yeah, I think this is something that we should pursue." So we started West Virginia Paranormal Investigations in 2007. He stepped away since then, but I've been kind of carrying that torch for 15 years almost.
That's amazing. And of course, once again, it goes in way of the sustainability within the passion for the field. Again, so many of these groups have spurred up and then just dropped off for one reason or another. And usually it's because of time. And what I mean by that is that there's an initial passion for it. People get together, they do these investigations, they have high hopes, then life starts happening. People get married, they have kids, they move away. Whatever the reason is, the organization disbands. And once again, I want to just acknowledge that the outfit you have in way of longevity is awesome, and I certainly find that unique. When you look at some of, well, let's hold on. Let's talk about how you walk into a location. Okay, so it's been said many times before you enter into something like this, you need to either protect yourself or you need to allow the spirits to know that you're coming. There has to be some sort of give and take in way of this. There's more synergistic affect than perhaps just walking into a place. And by the way, when I first saw Ghost Hunters, I think it was in late 90s. Okay, my first thought was, look at these fucking motherfucking guys going out there. These guys are crazy. Look at these crazy
Yeah.
guys. They're going to go in here willingly. They're going to get hurt. Well, of course, we've seen, the certain things that have come in way of that. But by and large, people continue to do it. How do you keep yourself safe? You and your team, is this something of an individual endeavor? Maybe one goes off in the corner, says a prayer, the other one does something completely different, or do you guys sort of commune as a group before you enter a location? Do you speak to the spirit world before you go in? What do you do? What is your your procedure on that?
We don't really have a set procedure. I think it's very personal. I myself and Scott have never went in and said, "Oh, we have to say a prayer before we do this, or we have to do A, B, or C before we get going." Usually, when we go in, we will kind of introduce ourselves and tell whatever may be there why we're there. We're there to communicate and get to know them and their story and document it and share it with people. So that's kind of how we open up the lines of communication. And then usually before we leave, we do say something along the lines of "Thank you for talking to us, but please stay here and we don't want you to follow us," which definitely doesn't always work, but it works more often than it doesn't.
Oh,
So we
really?
still try to do it, but I mean, it's not a foolproof thing doing that.
Well, that's sort of my concern. And, although I've gone out and continued to visit some of these locations, it was in a different manner in there, wanting that result, doing what I needed to do it. And it wasn't necessarily aggressive or disrespectful, but I was forthright in my communications with these specific spirits. And as I mentioned, there were attachments involved 2 separate times. These things were tough. Have you yourself ever experienced what we would consider an attachment, or anybody else on your team? And how did you go through that? How did you regain your life back without this attachment on you?
Yeah, I mean, we've definitely had that happen over the years.
Sorry,
And
hang tight. I think we're having a few issues with the internet. Give me one moment here. Sorry, hang on one second. I couldn't hear you. You can keep going if you can hear me. Sorry. Okay, now
I
we're
can
back.
hear you. Are we good?
Okay. Yes.
All right.
Did you hear the question? I'm sorry.
I did. Yeah, I got you.
Okay.
We've definitely had stuff follow us over the years. I don't know um, if there's a specific reason why that happens or what the case is. Um, Most of the time, it's something that will follow you home for a little while, and then for whatever reason, if you just kind of ignore it, it'll get bored and stop. So it hasn't been anything that's been really negative or impacted our lives long term. Scott does actually have something or someone that follows us from location to location, and we'll get a lot of the same
Really?
answers and things like that. We ask her name, and we have a name that we call. We think it's a female spirit that follows him around, and we think it's actually been something that's followed him around since his childhood home. So we kind of joke about that and say that he has a paranormal girlfriend that follows him around. But we've definitely had stuff like that. Actually, on one of our recent investigations on season 2 that we started to film, Scott did. We were doing solos, and Scott actually told whoever or whatever was there to mess with me in my dreams because we were sleeping there that night, and he did it in like a playful manner. It wasn't anything mean or anything like that. But here, come to find out, about the next 2 weeks after we got home, Scott actually had really, really intense bad dreams after that. So he thinks, and we think, that whatever he was telling to mess with me decided to go home and mess with him. So he had to smudge his house, and it's slowed down since then. But I mean, I definitely think it's part of being in the field. You have to be willing to deal with that.
And again, that is also my concern, because I do believe that there's danger in this. In fact, one of the attachments that I had caught, it was a very predatorial being. It was non-human and so ancient, it didn't respond even to white light or anything else I could use in way of protection. What ended up happening was, prior to my encounter with this, another investigator 8 months prior got in touch with this through certain means of just being on the property. This thing followed her home, ripped her life apart. This was Joni Mahan, okay? And she wrote an entire book on this particular entity and her experiences. You know, I have to wonder, because there are people who are very interested in going out into these fields. What would you suggest that somebody who's interested in doing this but doesn't necessarily have the know-how do in way of protecting themselves so that they can have the most positive experience possible walking into a location?
Yeah, I definitely think it circles back to what I said before. Whatever your core belief is, whether that's your religion, whatever it is that you can kind of focus your energy on and kind of use as your guiding source, That's what it really comes down to. Whatever it is you use to kind of root yourself in that moment and kind of give off that energy that you're not going to be messed with. And it's not foolproof. Anytime you're doing it, there is a risk. There's just no way
Yes.
around that. But I mean, if you put yourself in the proper mindset and you aren't just out there willy-nilly thinking it's a game and running around acting scared just for the sake of acting scared, I mean,
Right.
I think you're taking the proper steps and centering and grounding yourself. I mean, you're going to be better off than most.
Very sound advice, in my opinion. Certainly not an easy question to answer because it is very individualized, and yet we do need something in way of that guidance, I think, for the generations that are coming up, and just getting interested in the field, thinking that it's all just sort of fun and games, turn the lights off, flick the flashlights, we're going dark, whatever you want to say, and, just out there having a good time. I've left investigations feeling incredibly drained, sometimes sick, and this may have persisted for 2-3 days. The last documentary I filmed on the Bridgewater Triangle, it took me a full 2 weeks to shed off this accumulation of energy that I had just being in the locations. It wasn't anything sentient, no conscious energy behind it. It was just sort of laid on me the way that mud sits and hardens. It was very strange to feel this. Very quickly, third phase of Moon. What's up, boys? And congratulations on the release of your new documentary, Above Top Secret. Go and check it out on Amazon Prime today. It is still #1 for documentaries, guys. Check it out. Third phase asks, can you ask Jonathan what he considers his best piece of evidence of actual paranormal activity? Jonathan, take it away.
We actually, for our Forgotten Relics web series, we actually captured this during the filming, so I feel super fortunate because I don't know that people would believe it if it wasn't actually on video. We were at a place that is one of our favorite locations of all time. It's called the Hammond House here in West Virginia. And we captured a disembodied scream that was so loud and terrifying that we all kind of just like froze. And it's actually in the episode. If you want to go check it out, it's on our YouTube series. It is to this day the most inexplainable piece of evidence that we've ever caught. If you watch the episode, we immediately sprinted outside as soon as we kind of realized what was going on to make sure that there wasn't somebody outside like getting murdered. Like that's how blood curdling this scream was. So we tried everything we could to debunk it. We weren't able to debunk it. So that stands probably to this day as my most profound evidence that we've captured.
So within your environment, when you heard this audible scream, I'm assuming because you said you went outside, this was sort of outside, perhaps in some woods or something along those lines. It wasn't within the establishment that you were in?
Oh, no, it was 100% we were in the middle of a town, like a small town, but there was no people outside. This is in backwoods, West Virginia. So there's one street in front of us. There's a couple houses on either side, but it wasn't like a crowded city or anything like that. The scream, we're 100% positive, came from inside the house.
Inside. Okay.
But we wanted to, like I said, we always try to debunk everything. So we immediately ran outside just to be sure that there wasn't somebody getting mugged or something outside and screaming for their life. So we obviously didn't find anything, as you'll see in the episode. So we still to this day have no evidence or no reason to think it wasn't something paranormal.
So fleeting these events are. It could be something as simple as what you just mentioned there. Many times people capture EVPs unintentionally. This certainly has happened to me in several cases. And then there are other cases where I do catch an EVP that I've been searching for in way of communication, but it comes in a different language. Maybe it's Portuguese or something that's in line of the location that you're in. And to me, I think that's a little bit more corroborative in way of certain physical evidence, because if you can trace the history back to the location and find that Portuguese people were held at this place at one point or another, and you're getting EVPs that are in Portuguese, well, there's again a very strong correlation in my opinion. Now, you mentioned the Hammond House as one of the most haunted places that, obviously you experienced this auditorial phenomenon. What's the history of this place? What happened there?
That's the awesome thing about it. I mean, we know the basic history and we know some of like the key moments, but there's not a ton known about it, but we keep learning more and more every time we go back there, and we're kind of piecing together the story. It was built for a prominent lawyer in the area. We know of a few deaths that did occur in the house, but we don't know a lot in between there. And we've been kind of figuring out over time that there is kind of a dominant male presence there that we interact with more and more. And we do think that that was the original proprietor, Mr. Haymond. So we do get a lot of instances with him being very, very aggressive toward females and not wanting female interaction. So we think he may have been more of like the prototypical alpha male kind of misogynist kind of guy. And the more that we kind of interact with that theory, we get a lot of responses that think maybe he was, who knows, maybe kind of had some stuff going on the side as far as seeing other women and other kind of shady business dealings and things like that. So it is a lot of kind of piecing things together from what we've captured, but it's actually really cool to kind of build this story out from the things that we capture there.
It's like building from the ground up and sort of back engineering the history. I mean, so much is lost within the folds of time, but some of those pieces that have been lost are integral to understanding what might have happened to, keep some of this activity today. What is your opinion on why some of this activity still exists in way of what appears to be sentient? Does it still take on a residual role to some degree, or does it seem to be fully aware of what it's doing, where it is, and why it's still there?
I mean, I wish I knew that. I guess everybody wishes they knew that that's involved in the field. That would
no, I want your opinion, though. I want your opinion.
So much easier. Oh, no, I just, it's something that I go back and forth on a lot because of the things that we experience. I think that more often than not, that whatever is here, they kind of not necessarily choose to be here, but they kind of choose to interact with us. They have the ability to interact more often than what they do, and then they pick and choose when they kind of interact with us for whatever reason. I mean, I definitely think there are times when things are residual in nature. If you're capturing footsteps every single night at the same time, then that's obviously going to be residual. But I think that whatever is there from a lot of the things that we've experienced is, especially going back to places multiple times, they kind of pick and choose when they want to interact. And I don't know if that's something where it takes so much energy for them to interact that they have to build that up over time, or if it's something where there's just like an everyday person where like, I don't want to talk to this guy tonight, so I'm not going to do it.
Sure.
So I think it can definitely play more toward the intelligent side of it than the residual side of it.
It's an ongoing debate, of course, and there are many theories in way of specific experiences that are under certain scrutiny, and of course, we're seeing patterns within this, and coming to an intellectual deduction based on those patterns. Just very quickly, guys, I'm seeing these what appears like an occasional orb flip by the camera here, and I'm watching to see if this is a bit of dust, and I'm not seeing anything. So I think that's kind of curious. One I saw was just a bit bigger than what I've normally seen in here. So if you guys see anything, point it out. Let me know. But it started at around 31 minutes, just to kind of give you the idea. If you guys are watching in the archives, go back and check it out. Let me know what you think we're seeing here. This isn't the first time it's happened, so that's why I'm looking for input on that. When we go into these locations, many times we're looking for some sort of trauma, or at least to validate that there was a history and way of that trauma. And of course, this will yield certain results in the investigation. What about a more benign energy? Maybe something that is still living there, habitating within, let's say, an old house or an asylum. They seem to be comfortable, but no threat to anybody. Do you encounter some of these? And if you do, are they more apt to actually communicate with you in a pleasant manner?
Absolutely. And I think that's one thing that we talk to people about all the time is places don't need to have like this incredibly high death toll to be haunted or to have activity. And the way that I usually explain it to people is if this person, for whatever reason, is here, whether they choose to stay here or whether they're stuck here, but they have the ability to move for whatever reason, why would you choose to go stay where you died versus stay where you lived and loved your life? So,
Right.
like we talked about Mr. Heyman, he did die at the house, but say he died at the hospital or somewhere like that, why would he choose to stay at that hospital versus stay at the home that he built? So I think a lot of times we kind of go down that line that these spirits want to be here versus are stuck here. Now, I think there are absolutely tragic events that kind of, for whatever reason, stick in time, and that energy just kind of sticks there for that specific reason because of this tragic event. But I also think there are a lot of times when these spirits actually want to be in this location versus wanting to be somewhere else.
I have to agree with you on that. And of course, if somebody dies in a hospital and they lived in a nice home and you would expect them to go back to what was more pleasurable, my understanding is that there is a very parallel reality that's set on the other side, at least in way of this initial vibration. Let's say somebody passes over, some of the NDEs certainly experience this as well. It's just as solid as this reality and perhaps not even separate. Do you find that, again, I'm gonna try to tidy this up because I have a lot I want to say about it, but I need to bring it to that question here for you. Um, a lot of times if you move something in an environment, it disrupts the spirit that's on the other side, almost as in, hey, what the hell? Where did that piece of paper that was always here go? And you're walking out the front door with it saying, hey, look how old this thing is. It's kind of confusing. They may not see you, but they are seeing the affect of your presence. Do you find anything in way of experience when it comes to maybe moving something around the house, getting a reaction because you're simply just there? Is there anything in way of an acknowledgement where there is something solid in way of this physicality and the other side perhaps mirroring what's here? So again, if I move that piece of paper off to the left, spirit might somehow see that too. Perhaps they don't see our hand the way if they moved it, we wouldn't see their hand. What are your thoughts on that sort of construct in way of a theory?
No, that's great because that's one thing that we almost always ask on any investigation we go on. At some point during the investigation, we always ask, can you hear us or can you see us or both? And we will get varying answers to that on different occasions. So sometimes we'll get something either through an EVP or through a spirit box or whatever we're doing to where they say we can hear you or we can see you or we can hear and see you. So that is basically exactly what you're talking about, whether it's this veil or wall or whatever you want to call it. Sometimes it feels like they can see directly through that. Sometimes it feels like that, like we're hearing their voice. Maybe they're just hearing our voice and they have no
Yes.
idea what we're doing there. So that's a very interesting thing that we try to explore a lot, is to try to figure out exactly what the interaction for them is like versus the interaction for us, if that makes sense. So we do ask that a lot. And that was one of the reasons why we wanted to explore trigger objects a lot with Forgotten Relics, is to try to introduce something like that to them that maybe they haven't seen in a long time, or there's something that they
Yes.
don't see every day. And we bring this into them and they're like, oh man, where did this come from? I haven't seen that since I was a kid, or whatever the case is. And they see something different and they're like, I'm going to talk to them or I'm going to interact with them because I see this thing here. So I definitely think there's a lot of credence to that for sure.
I have to bring back a specific broadcast by the Ghost Hunters, and I think this must have been in the early 2000s. And no, I don't put a lot of stock in that particular outfit, and there are many reasons that I don't, including one that I debunked myself that they had put on a show for. But with that in mind, I don't think everything that was on the show was contrived. And there was one specific episode, guys, if you know which one this is, go ahead and let me know which one. I just can't remember off the top of my head. They were in an older house, and they're calling out and saying, are you here? And in a gruff voice on the equipment they were using, they catch an EVP that says, yes, where are you? And you can hear the accent coming through. You can hear the boisterous nature of that voice. And yet it seems like there is such a disconnect between our two levels of acknowledgement and way of presence. Again, I find that fascinating, that perhaps it's like a game of hide and seek They can't see you, you can't see them, but you're both aware that you're in the same physical space. So what does this implication mean for us? Okay, again, in your opinion, what does this implication mean for us if we are experiencing in certain times two different realities, wherein many people say every reality that exists in the same shared space separated by vibration and frequency? What are your thoughts, again, as a whole? And I'm stretching this out a little bit, but what are your thoughts as a whole when it comes to experiencing, or the possibility of experiencing, another reality within our reality? Of course, putting ourselves into that situation when we go out in a paranormal investigation.
I think you just have to have such an open mind when you're approaching it that you can't go in thinking that it's exactly how most people think it is. I mean, I feel like most people think somebody's in a place, they die, their spirit remains there, they're just kind of sitting there waiting around all day, and then somebody comes in and starts talking, and then they start answering them. I don't feel like that's how it is. I mean, it could be how it is, but I just don't think, from my experience, that that's exactly how it is. I feel like there's some level to it, exactly what you're talking about, where things have to line up a certain way, or things have to happen in a certain way to be able to have that communication both ways. And maybe something where we could go and sit and talk for hours and hours and they never hear us, or they could be screaming and banging on the walls and we never hear them. So I think you have to have a very open-minded approach to how you do things and how you approach interaction and communication, versus having one set way in your mind. And if that doesn't work, then you're like, oh, well, I guess on to the next. Because then you never advance anything, or you never move forward. You're just kind of running in place.
Talk to me a little bit about your equipment that you use. Okay. Are you walking into these investigations with backpacks full of stuff? Do you have people that walk in saying, hey, my body is my most accurate instrument? What do you have? Or let me let me simplify it, because your arsenal may be quite extensive. What are some of your favorite pieces of equipment to use when you're in the field?
Yeah, we do have basically everything that you can think of, but we don't always use all of the pieces of equipment, just because if you use everything, I mean, it can get overwhelming really fast, and it can confuse yourself. So let alone if you're communicating with somebody else who's not familiar with it, it can be very overwhelming to them. So we do have specific things that we try to use, and if we do use anything, we make sure we very clearly explain it to whoever may be there, exactly how to use it before we go in and interact. We don't just flip on a switch and expect them to know what's going on and hope that they can figure it out as they go. I just don't feel like that's very, I mean, if you took, I don't know, if somebody was coding a computer and they brought it into me and they said, oh, here you go, figure it out, I'm not going to be able to do that. But if you give me an explanation and say hit X, Y, and Z, I can at least try to get the rough points of it. So we do try to break it down and explain whatever it is we're using. We do a lot of stuff, specifically auditory stuff. We have some voice recorders, we have spirit boxes, things like that. We do try to use those just because it does present well on our film for the web series. But then we do a lot of things where we kind of use ourselves, like you were talking about, as kind of the rod for the energy. I'm not psychic. I've never claimed to be psychic. I don't. I do believe that there are people out there that have those abilities. I'm not one of them, but I do trust my body, and I've said it many times on our web series. I get like a sharp pressure on my temple when there's some energy around me, and it almost always corresponds with something else in the environment happening.
Curious.
So I've learned to trust that over 15 years, to where if I feel that, I openly say that, and we usually try to do something else to kind of corroborate that. So you do have to be able to trust your own instincts and learn to use your body, because your body can tell when stuff changes around you.
That is a very interesting thing that you're mentioning, because you're sitting there telling me, you don't claim to be a psychic, clairvoyant, any sort of medium, and yet you still can walk into some of these places and have that sort of physical affect that's observed quite readily. What? The layperson who's going into this, and believe me, I have seen many of skeptical minds join on either investigations or get themselves in some other experience, and afterwards they're not necessarily convinced that yes, this was a ghost, it was a paranormal experience, but they're damned if they can explain it. What are your thoughts on some of those people who have one-offs and are somewhat convicted but don't fully grasp the extent of what they have just experienced? In other words, if I was just somebody who had never had any experience and not a clairvoyant, I can walk into a location, is there a good chance at some point that I will experience something physical, that something will manifest itself to me in one way, shape, or form, that I can go home and say, hey, from this investigation or that investigation, I had something happen to me that I couldn't explain? What are the chances?
I mean, that's very hard to kind of wrap your head around, because I think it's very, like I said, it's very individual to the person. Because I've seen people walk into a location and have something happen within like an hour because they're open-minded. They've kind of opened themselves up to communication, whatever that means to them, and they allow themselves to be in that moment. And then I've had people go in, like I said earlier, and they're just so closed off to everything. And it's not just like closed off to, oh, I don't believe in ghosts, which is fine because you can still have an experience like that. But if you just close yourself off to your environment and your surroundings altogether, and you're just so dead set that nothing's going to happen, and you just don't allow yourself to even for a second believe that you could hear something or see something, and you don't even pay attention to your surroundings, or just, like I said, just let your body do what it normally does, and you're just so dead set against it, you're probably not going to have anything happen. So, I mean, it's definitely very individual to the person, and it's also individual to the location you're at. I mean, like I said, I don't think that every location is going to have things happen every single time you go into it, but there are places that are going to have stuff happen more often than others. So, I think if you're open and you have the right mindset and you approach it the right way and then in the right location, there's a pretty decent chance that you'll have something where you at least scratch your head and be like, oh, I'm not 100% sure on that one.
So there is hope for those who are incredibly skeptical that there is a possibility, right? And of course, mentality is something. If you are steadfast in saying, I'm not going to experience anything at all, there's a very good chance you're going to manifest that reality the same way that the opposite would have an effect, right? Because we do influence in a very observable sense, as well as a quantum effect in way of these experiences. What I'm going to do right now, everyone out there that's listening in the chat, I'm going to open up the lines, okay? Yes, I'm bringing this back into the radio format that it deserves to be. Now, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to drop the link into this show, into the chat. If you do have a question that is pressing on an answer, hop in, audio only. I will not allow you in if you're showing video, or if you turn video on, I'm going to take you off. But I would love to give people the opportunity to come in, share a voice very quickly, ask the question, and then we'll move on. So for the next 10 minutes or so, that's exactly what we're going to do. Don't worry about the capital letters. We're just come on in and say hello and give us a good question about the paranormal and perhaps what Jonathan has been doing. How about EVPs, man? Got any good EVPs in your pocket?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. That was like how everybody started out. And that's the same with us. We started out with a pretty basic voice recorder. And that was the first thing that we kind of cut our teeth on when we got into it and kind of learned. One of the very first places that we ever went, and it's still one of my favorite places that we've ever been to this day, is this 2-story farmhouse in the middle of nowhere, West Virginia. So when you say middle of nowhere, West Virginia, that's legitimately the middle of nowhere. So we were playing with a little toy, and there was a little boy who was supposedly there that we were trying to interact with, and we actually were talking, say, hey, you can play with our toy, and we legitimately got our EVP, and to this day it still gives me chills talking about it. It's a squeaky little voice. It sounds like a little kid, and it says, but I don't want your toy. The direct response question, that was, like I said, one of our very first investigations. And that one, to this day, like, that sticks out in my mind.
In your research, why do you think certain spirits, we'll say, connect with an object and stick within them? I mean, it appears to be that they're in the object as almost as if they enter it. And we've had plenty of cases of dolls that have been haunted. You know, there's Annabelle and a host of others. Robert the doll. I can't even look at pictures of that one dude. I get such terrible feelings. It's invasive and it starts to grow as you focus on it. So I honestly I can't research that subject anymore. And how do you think some of these spirits might enter these inanimate objects and then stick with them?
That's a really good question. I think it's just a comfortability with that item or that object, something that they connect to on a very, very personal and individual thing, to where that they can kind of see themselves in that, or kind of project themselves into that and feel good and safe and comfortable. We actually have a friend who has a haunted museum here in West Virginia. He's a good friend
Oh,
of
really?
ours, and he has some incredible items. But one of the items is a doll. It's called the Hope doll, and this thing it's beyond creepy. And that's one of the things. We went there one time, but we're going to go back and film maybe later this fall. And that's one of the things I
Hmm.
kind of want to focus on, is to see why whatever it is attached to that object.
Now, do you think that the spirit is actually in the physical matter, or do you think it might be something that's sort of just hovering around it and creating some sort of effect via that particular route?
Yeah, I'd say it's more around. I don't think it's physically inside of whatever the object is, in my personal opinion. I'd say it's more something that is there and is attached to it and around it, more so than inside of it.
I'd have to agree with you because to me, it doesn't make sense that something would actually enter within the body. In fact, possession itself, I've come to learn and certainly have had questions on in way of actually entering the body. I don't think this is the case. I think that if anything, there can be action on an auric field, which of course is intricately connected to us and mood, health, and you name it. Everything is in that field is just as important as your physical body, and perhaps even makes up a good portion of the physical body in way of our interpretation. So again, you have this peripheral sense. What's your thoughts on possession? Can somebody actually take on a spirit and start acting in such a way that seems to be influenced by a negative energy?
I think it's extremely rare, and I've never personally experienced something to that degree. Now, I've definitely seen people, myself included, be affected by something, not
Hmm.
necessarily to the point of being taken over, but I've like lost time before, to where I thought I was in a place for 5 minutes and I was there for like 20 minutes and I have no idea what would happen during that time. And I've had places where I've been physically affected, to the point, like you talked about earlier, where I was physically ill and like got
Hmm.
sick at a location. So I definitely think it can be something that affects. And I guess if that's the case, then in theory, it could affect you to the point where it's able to manipulate your actions in some way. But I think it's so incredibly rare that the majority of the time that people are experiencing this, it's explainable in some other way.
Even within voodoo and some of these other cultures that are ritual based, I don't necessarily think that, once again, like you're saying, that it's a totality and way of taking over. There's certainly an influence, and that can be seen. But beyond that, in a traditional exorcism sense, I'll remember the movie and of course the concept. It's too bad. I wish Father Malachi was still with us, and I think he would have a lot to say today, based on what he was giving us some years ago. But alas, we are losing so many of these prominent figures within our field because guess what? Their tenure and their time is done. So they pass that torch on to the next. And guess what, Jonathan? That's us, man. That's
That's
us.
right. That's right.
So, listen, before we get out of here, I want to ask you to plug yourself, let people know where they can find you, if they can contact you. If somebody has an issue within your location, can they contact you to come out and check it out? How far is your reach? Will you go to another state? What are you looking at here in way of connection with the public?
We do everything that we can to help the public, as far as answering questions and guiding whatever they need. We don't do residential investigations anymore, just because a lot of the liability reasons that come along with that. But we do have a lot of friends who are able to do that. So if you have a problem, definitely reach out to us. And if we can't help you through messaging, we'll find somebody in your area that would be able to come out and help you out. So the easiest way to get a hold of us is Facebook, West Virginia Paranormal Investigations on Facebook. Send us a message to the group. We check it every day. We're also on Instagram at WVPara Investigations. Obviously, we're on YouTube, youtube.com/WVPara, WVPARA. All of those avenues are open. We have an email, wvparainvestigations@yahoo.com. That gets checked less frequently. So if you can get a hold of us on one of the socials, that's usually a little bit quicker. But like I said, we'll do whatever we can to help with your situation.
I really appreciate that. And what you're saying in way of, hey, we can't get out there. Maybe we can find somebody who can help you within your area. That is incredibly important, especially today, to network with some of these folks, because even I get questions. Hey, I'm out in a certain part of Canada. I need some help. I'm in one of the states out west, or I'm on the West Coast, East Coast, wherever. There's a good chance that I can find somebody that can help them. And of course, although I can't be there physically, we're still getting the job done. So that's very commendable that your group will do that type of charity approach. And I think that is the way it should be.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you, Jonathan. I really appreciate you joining us tonight. If you have to go, I understand. If you can hang on for just a moment, I'll say my proper goodbyes off camera. But either way, I'm very fascinated by the work that you and your team has done, and look forward to much more in way of this particular work and evidence that you bring to the table moving forward.
I really appreciate you having me on. It's been a blast. I had a lot of fun. And everybody, like I said, check out Forgotten Relics Season 1. We have 9 episodes up. We have 4 episodes filmed for Season 2, and it is absolutely incredible. So get ready. We got some crazy stuff coming down the road. And
I cannot wait to see it, folks. I'll bring you off just a moment, and I'll see you in a minute if I can. I can't wait. A lot of creativity that goes into this type of stuff. And of course, you see this, with the advent of YouTube, Twitter, all these other social media platforms that allow for the publication of your artwork or your work in general. This is an important time that we live in way of this information and how it's disseminated. And of course, we're seeing some of the back ends of that, or the darker sides of it, especially within disinformation. And I could point to any one of these fields, and they are all guilty of having some sort of infiltration along the way. So we're going to continue to explore this and, again, garner all these different insights to come to some sort of cohesive idea of what we're experiencing. And perhaps while we're doing this, the phenomena will catch up with us first. I would be certainly okay with that. I want to thank all of you for being here tonight. We do have Charles Lear, a ufologist and author, coming on tomorrow night at 11 o'clock p.m. Eastern Time. And I want to apologize that we had to move this show out a few times. But guess what? Sometimes in the world of show business, things do happen in life, and we do need to accommodate for it. But I want to thank you for sticking with us and coming by this evening. And again, we will be back tomorrow night. In the meantime, thank you to all my moderators for the fantastic job you do. I gotta shout her out. I have to. Cashew Gesundheit has been an absolute watchdog for us here and has been with us since the beginning. And I owe a good part of my life to her. I keep telling her I'll give my arm or a leg, but you know what? She's got 2 arms and 2 legs. I don't really know what she'll do with the rest of it. So yes, my energy, my heart goes out to Cashew and all of the other moderators that we have and have been working with us for the time that they have. I very much appreciate that. And of course, thank you for the super chats that came in. Appreciate it. Long Island Bigfoot, thank you for the $5. And of course, thank you to the viewer for your presence, your energy, your insight, and what you lend to this show as we do these live streams. I really appreciate it. And I can't wait to see more of you moving forward in time. Until next time, stay explorative, stay vigilant, and continue to fearlessly explore this field that we are all in search of a certain truth so that we may share and collectively come to a consensus. Ciao.